Translate this. My salary is yours, the CEO sneered. The single Dad Janitor's reply shocked her. The 52nd floor of Arden Global Tower had no softness in it. The architects had designed the conference room in the language of dominance, floor-to-ceiling glass on three sides, white recessed lighting that left no shadow, a table of pale limestone that stretched the length of a city bus. Outside, Chicago was being buried. Snow had been falling since noon, erasing the skyline in slow degrees, and the wind off Lake Michigan pressed itself against the glass with a low, continuous groan that nobody inside seemed to hear. They were too busy failing. 8 people sat around the table, 6 lawyers, 1 vice president of mergers, and CEO Elena Roth. On the table between them lay a contract, 83 pages, bound with a black clip, printed in German. The cover sheet bore the letterhead of Kessler Industrie Group, a Frankfurt-based conglomerate that had been courting Arden Global for 14 months. The merger, if completed, would be worth $320 million. The deadline, the moment at which Kessler's board would withdraw their offer and move to a competitor, was 6:47 in the morning, Frankfurt time. That was 4 hours and 11 minutes away. The conference room had been set up for a long session. Water pitchers, a tray of sandwiches that no one had touched. A whiteboard on the interior wall that bore a timeline in red marker. The timeline had been updated twice in the past 3 hours. Both updates had moved the deadline notation earlier, not later. One of the junior attorneys had a laptop open, connected to a remote session with a translation service that had placed them on hold 17 minutes ago and had not returned. The hold music was something French and indeterminate. No one had thought to mute it. Elena Roth had built Arden Global over 11 years from a mid-sized consulting operation into one of the Midwest's preeminent technology holding firms. She had done it through a combination of precision and will that people who worked for her described, depending on how long they had worked for her, as either inspiring or relentless. She held herself to the same standard she applied to every system she oversaw. No tolerance for structural weakness, no patience for problems that could have been anticipated. She was good at her work in the way that certain people are good at survival, completely, without method, as a function of who they were. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, the problem in front of her was not yielding to any of those qualities. The contract lay on the table in a language that none of her carefully assembled team could adequately read. And the clock did not care. "Tell me again," Elena said. Her voice was the same temperature as the table. She was 38 years old, with dark hair pulled back without ornament, and the posture of someone who had decided years ago that relaxation was a liability. "Tell me again why I have 8 lawyers in this room, and none of them can read this document." Martin Chu, the VP of Mergers, loosened his collar with 2 fingers. "The language is highly technical. Specialized legal German. The firm we normally use for translation is in Munich," Elena said. "I know where they are. It's 2 in the morning in Munich. What I want to know is what we're doing about it." She looked at each face in turn. Each face looked at the table. She stood, walked to the window, and looked at the snow. For 30 seconds, no one spoke. Then she turned back and said, "Somebody find me an option. Any option. I don't care what it costs." It was Martin who noticed the door first. The maintenance door, at the far end of the hall, just visible through the conference room's interior glass wall. A man in a gray uniform was working there with a mop, moving in the deliberate and unhurried pattern of someone who has learned to be invisible. He was in his mid-40s, with a broad build, gone a little soft at the shoulders. The kind of face that had once been angular and was now just tired. He had stopped mopping. He was reading the contract cover through the glass, or rather, he was reading the words on the cover. His head tilted slightly, the way someone reads something they understand. Martin said, "Slowly, Mr. Bennett." The man looked up. His name badge said Noah. "Do you?" Martin hesitated. "Can you read German?" There was a pause. Noah Bennett leaned the mop handle against the wall and knocked twice on the conference room door before pushing it open. He did not come all the way in. He stood at the threshold, one hand on the doorframe, and said, "I heard you talking. I wasn't trying to. Sound carries in that hallway." Elena crossed her arms. "Mr. Bennett, can you read legal German?" "Some," he said. The room tried not to laugh and mostly failed. One of the junior attorneys, a young man named Pierce, who wore his confidence like a new suit, put a hand over his mouth. Someone else at the far end cleared their throat in a way that meant the opposite. Elena picked up the contract and walked it to the door. She held it out. There's a clause in here somewhere about a letter of intent from 2019. Our team can't find it. If you can tell me what page it's on, I'll double your Christmas bonus. Noah took the contract. He read the cover page for 4 seconds. He flipped to the index, ran his finger down 3 columns of text, and said, "There's no mention of a 2019 letter of intent in the index. That's either an oversight or a deliberate omission." He looked up. "Which one worries you more?" The room was quiet. Elena said, "What's your full name?" "Noah Bennett." "How much do you make a year, Mr. Bennett?" He named a number. It was not a large number. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, in a tone that was meant to be overheard, "Translate this document. Flag every risk. And produce a summary in English before 6 o'clock. Do that," she paused, and the pause was theatrical. "A performance of generosity for the room, and I'll give you my annual salary, every cent of it." The number she said next made Pierce's hand stop moving. $2.5 million. Someone at the table made a sound that was not quite a laugh. The tension in the room shifted into something sharper, more uncomfortable. People looked at each other. Noah did not change his expression. He said, "I need that in writing. Signed, dated, with a notary witness or a second authorized signatory." Before I begin, the room went still, not the stillness of mockery, a different kind. Elena Roth looked at the janitor standing in her conference room doorway in his gray uniform, holding an 83-page contract in German, and for the first time that night she felt something that was not irritation or calculation. It was something closer to attention. "Draft it," she said to her VP. "Get it signed." The agreement took 11 minutes to produce. Elena signed it. The VP of Legal signed as witness. Noah read it twice, folded it without creasing the corners, and placed it in the interior pocket of his uniform jacket. "I'll need a room with a door that closes," he said. "And whatever documents you have on the 2019 relationship with Kessler, any emails, any prior agreements, anything your team worked from when they first began discussions." Martin was already moving. "I'll be done before 6, Noah said. "I have to leave by 7:30. My son has a cardiology appointment at 8:15, and the bus from his school to the hospital is unreliable in the snow." He said it without self-pity and without emphasis, the way a person states a logistical fact. Elena watched him follow Martin down the hall toward a smaller room on the interior of the floor. No view, fluorescent light. A coffee machine that had been broken since September. She went back to the window and looked at the snow. Noah Bennett had studied German at the University of Wisconsin, where he had arrived on a merit scholarship from a small town outside Green Bay with a suitcase, a library card, and the particular determination of people who understand that they will not get a second run at their first opportunity. He had graduated in 3 years, spent 1 summer working as an interpreter for a Milwaukee law firm that handled German-speaking clients, and applied to Georgetown's comparative law program on the advice of a professor who told him, without sentimentality, that he was too precise for academia and too curious for corporate life in its ordinary form, which meant international law was probably his best option. He had completed the master's with a focus on international commercial contracts, and then spent 6 years as a senior contract analyst for a firm called Hartwell & Voss, which specialized in cross-border mergers and acquisitions across the European manufacturing sector. His German was not conversational German. It was precise, technical. The kind built by years of reading documents that had consequences, not documents that recorded things, but documents that caused them. He had been good at it in a way that his colleagues recognized by giving him the contracts nobody else wanted to touch. The ones with ambiguous jurisdiction clauses, the ones drafted by law firms whose standards were polished to the point of opacity, the ones that required reading not just for what they said, but for the shape of what they had chosen to leave unsaid. He had met Caroline at a bar in Georgetown on a Wednesday in October. She was a pediatric occupational therapist, finishing her last clinical placement, with a loud laugh and an extreme dislike of cilantro, and a habit of being right about people that she attributed to professional training and her friends attributed to something she had been born with. They had argued about a documentary on their second date and agreed about everything that mattered within 6 months, and married in a courthouse ceremony with 8 people present because neither of them wanted to spend money on a party that could instead go toward a house. He had left that career on a Tuesday in March, 8 years ago. Caroline had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition 2 years prior. For 22 months, they had managed it together, her illness, his work, the routines they built to hold the center. She had insisted on the routines with the same energy she brought to everything. Tuesday dinners, Saturday mornings at the market, the bedtime rituals with Ethan that Noah had memorized so completely, he could still recite them in order without thinking. Then she stopped responding to treatment. The word the doctors used was refractory, a clinical term for the condition in which the body has ceased to cooperate with medicine, and in the space of 4 months, she was gone. He was 37 years old with a 6-year-old son named Ethan and a resume that meant nothing to him anymore. He did not grieve the career. He grieved Caroline in every other way there was. And then he kept moving. Because Ethan needed him to keep moving. Ethan had been born with a congenital bicuspid aortic valve, a structural irregularity that required monitoring, periodic procedures, and the kind of ongoing medical relationship that consumed time and attention and required a parent who was never, under any circumstances, unavailable. The condition was manageable. It was not, at present, a crisis. But manageable required the steady application of attention over years, and attention required presence, and presence required a schedule that could be reorganized around an appointment notice, with 48 hours of warning without the entire structure collapsing. Noah had looked at his old job, with its 60-hour weeks and its international travel and its phone calls at midnight from Frankfurt, and he had looked at his son, and the math was not complicated. The maintenance job at Arden Global had come through a city job board, posted without ceremony, paying a number that was sufficient if he was careful. The hours were midnight to 6. Ethan was at his grandmother's 3 nights a week. On other nights, Noah was home before breakfast, made the morning routine, and was in bed by 9. It was a life built around a single premise. Ethan needed a father who was present, and nothing else mattered enough to compete with that. He had tested the premise, in the first year, by imagining alternatives. He always stopped imagining at the same point, the moment when the alternative required him to hand some portion of Ethan's childhood to someone else's care, and the test always returned the same result. He did not tell people about Georgetown. He did not tell them about the career, or the publications too, both in German-language law journals, both on contract interpretation in cross-border disputes, or the 2 conference presentations he had given in Hamburg and Vienna in better years. The Hamburg one had gone particularly well. He had been 32 years old, in a good suit, with a prepared text he had abandoned after the first 3 minutes in favor of talking from memory, and the room had been engaged in the way that rooms are engaged when they are learning something. He had called Caroline afterward from the hotel bar, and she had said, in the tone she used for things she was proud of, that she wished she had been there. He was the janitor on the 52nd floor. That was the information other people needed, and it was sufficient. He sat down in the small room on the 34th floor, opened the contract to page 1, and started reading. The German was formal and dense, as expected. Kessler's legal team was thorough in the way that expensive German law firms tend to be thorough, every clause cross-referenced, every definition exhaustive, every term of art deployed with precision that read, to the untrained eye, as clarity, and to the trained one, as something else. Noah had spent 6 years learning to read the difference. Clarity disclosed risk. Precision, in certain kinds of documents, concealed it. He read the first 12 pages without stopping, building the architecture of the document in his mind, the way he always had. The main provisions, the definitions section, the liability structures, the conditions of completion. The contract was organized around 5 primary obligations and 12 secondary ones. And the primary obligations were, in themselves, reasonable. This was often how it worked. The problems were never in the primary obligations. He wrote notes in a parallel column, German phrase on the left, precise English equivalent on the right, with a separate column for structural flags, moments where the contract's language created a legal effect that might not be immediately visible to a reader unfamiliar with German commercial law, or familiar with German commercial law, but unfamiliar with the specific conventions of the Frankfurt School of Contract Drafting, which had its own preferences and habits. He did not use a dictionary. He did not need one. The room was small and slightly warm and smelled of old coffee grounds from the broken machine. The fluorescent overhead light was the buzzing kind that dental offices use. It was, in its way, exactly the right environment for the work. No view, no architecture, nothing to look at except the document. He had done this kind of work in hotel rooms in 3 countries, in a law library on a Sunday, on a train between Frankfurt and Stuttgart with the laptop wedged against the seat back. The setting was never the point. One of Arden's junior lawyers, a woman named Cassidy, put her head in at midnight. She had been sent to check on him, Noah understood, and possibly to report back that he was struggling or that the project was unsalvageable or both. She looked at the yellow legal pad covered in neat parallel columns and said nothing for a moment. "Can I get you something?" she asked. "Coffee if the machine works," he said. "It doesn't, so water is fine." She brought water in a paper cup and then lingered near the door, in the way of someone who has been told to observe something without being told how to observe it. "You can stay if you want," he said. "It might be useful to have someone who can take the notes to the team directly." Cassidy sat down across the table and pulled out her own notepad. She was, Noah estimated, about 6 years out of law school, competent, alert, not yet certain enough of herself to ask the questions she was formulating. "What law school?" he asked, without looking up. "Michigan," she said. "You?" "Georgetown." "Different program." He kept writing. "You can ask what you want to ask." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "How long did it take you to get to this level?" He thought about it. "I'm not sure the level is the right way to think about it. The work got more precise as the documents got more consequential. You pay more attention when the stakes are higher." He looked up briefly. "What's your area?" "Securities, but I've been doing M&A support for 2 years. Then you know what a cross-border disclosure obligation looks like." "In theory." "Good. That's what we're going to need in about 40 minutes. For the next hour, Noah translated aloud, pausing to explain technical terms, occasionally stopping to rephrase something 3 or 4 times until he was satisfied with the precision of the English equivalent. Cassidy wrote fast and kept up. She was good. She knew enough to ask clarifying questions at the right moments, and the right moments were specific and narrow, and not always obvious, and to stay quiet the rest of the time, which was the harder skill. At 1 in the morning, Noah reached the footnotes. This was where the architecture changed. Footnote 47, embedded in a section dealing with the transfer of existing commercial obligations, referenced an appendix. Anlage G. The footnote was 4 lines long and written in the dense subordinate clause German of administrative documentation, the kind of German that could be read by a native speaker and still fail to register its significance on a first pass, because its significance required recognizing what it was connected to, which required knowing about the connection before you encountered it. Noah read it once. Then he sat back. He read it again, slowly, word by word. Then a 3rd time. "Can you get Miss Roth?" he said. Cassidy looked up. "Now?" "Yes." Elena arrived 4 minutes later. She had removed her jacket at some point in the past hour. She was in a white shirt, sleeves pushed to the elbow, and she moved with the specific energy of someone running on professional obligation and will, past the point where adrenaline is still interesting. She sat across from Noah, without being invited, and looked at the legal pad. "What did you find?" Noah placed his finger on footnote 47. "This refers to Appendix G." "What does your team have on Appendix G?" "It's a list of existing licensing agreements being transferred as part of the merger." "Does your team have the 2019 documentation for those licensing agreements?" Elena looked at Cassidy. Cassidy was already on her phone. A minute passed. Then 2. "They say there was a preliminary letter of intent in April 2019, Cassidy said. "It wasn't in the main file. One of the attorneys found it in an archived folder. I need it printed," Noah said. It arrived in 8 minutes, slightly crooked from the printer. Noah smoothed it flat on the table and read it once quickly, then once more with his pen making small marks in the margin. "This is a problem," he said. He said it without drama, the way a doctor says the same word in an examination room. The letter of intent from 2019 was signed by your predecessor. He glanced at Elena. A man named Douglas Harkin, I assume, based on the signature block. He agreed, in writing, that in the event of any future merger or acquisition involving Arden Global's intellectual property portfolio, Kessler would retain a right of first refusal on any licensing agreements valued above $50 million. That language was never formally voided. It was never incorporated into the later preliminary agreements with specific carve-outs, and it has been embedded here, in footnote 47 of appendix language, in a way that is technically disclosed but functionally invisible unless you are looking for it. The room was quiet. If you sign this contract as written, Noah continued, you are acknowledging that letter of intent as a binding prior agreement. Kessler's right of first refusal would apply to 3 of your current licensing arrangements, 2 in the European defense sector and 1 in automotive manufacturing. The combined value of those arrangements is approximately $312 million. Elena had not moved. They set this up in 2019, she said. The groundwork, yes. It would have taken someone with access to both the 2019 files and this contract's full appendix structure to see it as a single pattern. Individually, each piece looks like standard documentation. Douglas Harkin retired 4 years ago, Elena said. He was on Kessler's advisory board for 18 months after he left us. Noah said nothing. He did not need to. Elena stood up and walked to the small room's single window. It looked onto an air shaft. There was nothing to see. She stood there anyway. Can it be fixed? She asked. There's a counteroffer structure that would work, he said. You respond with a formal rejection of Appendix G, as currently written, citing the unresolved status of the 2019 letter of intent and requesting its formal nullification as a condition of completion. Simultaneously, you notify Kessler that you have identified what may constitute a material misrepresentation under both U.S. and EU commercial law, specifically the failure to disclose the right of first refusal in the contract's primary risk disclosure section. That puts them in a position where completing the deal on their original terms creates legal exposure for them. They'll say it was disclosed. In the footnote, technically, yes, but the standard for disclosure in cross-border commercial contracts isn't technical visibility. It's whether a reasonably diligent party would have identified the provision as material. A 4-line footnote in appendix language, referencing a 9-year-old letter of intent that isn't in your current documentation file, is an argument you can make to a regulatory body with some confidence. Elena turned from the window. The tiredness in her face was real now, not managed. She looked at him directly. I owe you an apology, she said, for earlier, for the room. Don't, he said. We're not done. Let's finish. She sat back down across from him. Cassidy opened a new page. They worked until 4:40 in the morning. Noah translated the remaining sections, flagged 2 additional provisions that carried structural risk, one in the indemnification clause, one in a force majeure definition that had been broadened in a way that could, under the right circumstances, be invoked to delay payment obligations, and then drafted the counteroffer response in German. He wrote it by hand first, on the back pages of the legal pad, then dictated it to Cassidy, who typed while he paced the small room, adjusting clauses, finding the right register. The German he used for the response was formal legal German, the kind Kessler's attorneys would recognize as coming from someone who understood exactly what they had tried to do. It did not accuse. Accusation, in this context, would have been a strategic error. It would have backed Kessler's team into a defensive position and made the negotiation about fault rather than resolution. Instead, the letter identified the provisions in question with surgical precision, noted the undisclosed connection to the 2019 letter of intent in language that made the failure to disclose feel inevitable and verifiable, and proposed a path forward that Kessler could accept while preserving their commercial interest in the merger itself. This was the part of contract work that Noah had always found genuinely interesting, not the identification of problems, which was a matter of attention and knowledge, but the construction of solutions that served both parties' real interests rather than their stated positions. The Kessler deal was good for Arden. The Arden deal was good for Kessler. The buried letter of intent had been an attempt to improve Kessler's position at Arden's expense, but it was not the reason the two companies had been negotiating for 14 months. The underlying logic still held. Elena sat beside him for the last 2 hours. She had stopped monitoring and started participating sometime around 3 in the morning, when Noah had paused to explain a nuance in German contract law regarding the hierarchy of obligations between primary and supplementary agreements, and she had asked a question that showed she had been following more precisely than he had assumed. After that, the conversation changed. She was no longer managing the situation. She was in it. She knew her business entirely. The gaps in her knowledge were specific: the language, the archival documentation, the technical conventions of German commercial law, not the underlying commercial logic. She understood the merger's value, Kessler's strategic position, the leverage points on both sides. When Noah explained that Kessler's right of first refusal would apply to their 3 most profitable licensing arrangements, she did not need the implications spelled out. She had already calculated what that meant. By the time Cassidy sent the response to Kessler's Frankfurt office at 5:14 in the morning, the tone in the small room had changed entirely. It was not warm. Exactly. It was something more serious than warm. It was the particular respect that develops between two people who have worked on something difficult together and done it well, a respect that has nothing to do with position or title or the normal hierarchies of professional life, and everything to do with what each person had actually contributed over the past 4 hours. The response from Frankfurt came at 6:03. Kessler requested a 48-hour extension to review the counteroffer terms. Elena read the message, set her phone face down on the table, and did not move for a moment. "They're going to come back with concessions," she said. "Almost certainly," Noah said. He was capping his pen. The right of first refusal language was the leverage. Without it, the deal structure still works for them. They need this merger more than the negotiating position suggested. The 14 months of courtship was not a performance. "Douglas Harkin is still drawing a pension from us," Elena said. "The advisory board arrangement with Kessler ended 2 years ago, officially. I'll need to have our general counsel look at whether any of this constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty." "That's a separate conversation," Noah said, "and probably a longer one." "Yes." She looked at the table for a moment. "Yes, it is." He stood, gathered his notes, the legal pads, the annotated pages, the structural diagrams he had sketched for his own reference, and put on his uniform jacket. The gray looked wrong in the context of what had just happened, and then it looked entirely right. He had been wearing it all night. It was the right thing to have been wearing. Elena said, "The check will be ready this morning." "No rush," he said. "Whenever it's convenient." "Noah." She said his name for the first time. "Sit down for a moment." He sat. "I want to offer you a position, VP of International Legal Review. Your own team, travel budget, full executive compensation package." She paused, chose her words with care. "Benefits that would include comprehensive medical coverage for dependents. The kind that doesn't have caps." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city had begun its morning sounds, distant traffic, the particular groan of the building's heating system, cycling into full operation. The murmur of the elevator bank, 2 floors up. "That's generous," he said. "It's appropriate. I can't take it." She had expected negotiation. A counteroffer, at minimum, not refusal. "My son has a cardiology appointment at 8:15, he said. "He has had 17 of them. I have been to all 17. I have no intention of missing the 18th. A VP role in an executive team means availability, that I am not able to provide phone calls at midnight, travel with 48 hours notice, the kind of institutional presence that requires a person to be reachable in a way that overrides other commitments. I left that life for a reason I don't regret. The reason is 8 years old and is currently at his grandmother's apartment in Wicker Park, waiting for me to come home." Elena looked at him. "You're choosing a maintenance job," she said. The tone was not condescending. It was genuinely puzzled, the puzzlement of someone encountering a set of values that her usual models do not account for. "I'm choosing my son," he said. "There's a difference, and it's not a small one." The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. "Then tell me what you will accept," Elena said. He laid it out in the same clear, sequential manner he had used for the contract. "First, A consulting arrangement. Project-based. Capped at 12 hours per week. Conducted remotely, wherever possible, with an absolute right to decline any engagement during Ethan's school hours or medical appointments. The rate he named was professional and fair. Second, a comprehensive audit of the maintenance, facilities, and support staff compensation across Arden Global's Chicago operations, conducted by an independent third party of Noah's choosing, with Elena's written commitment to address any findings within 90 days. Third, Elena Roth would personally, not through a representative, not in a memo, speak to each member of the overnight maintenance crew by name, in person, before the end of the following week. Not to apologize as a corporate formality, but to acknowledge, individually, that she had spent years walking past people she had decided were invisible, and that this was a failure she intended to correct. Elena listened to all three conditions without interrupting. The audit, she said. You expect me to pay people more. I expect you to pay people what the work is worth. Whether that's more or less than current rates is what the audit is for. Though he paused, based on what I know of the current structure, it will almost certainly be more. And the third condition, the conversations. Yes, that's not a business condition, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. She was quiet for a long moment. All right, she said. He stood again, and this time she stood too. Your son, she said. What's his name? Ethan. How is he doing? Noah considered the question, the way he considered everything carefully, without rushing. He's doing well, he said. He drew a picture of a rocket last week that his cardiologist has now taped to the wall of her office. She says it's the best rocket she's seen since she was 8 years old. Elena almost smiled. It was the closest she'd come all night. Go, she said. You'll miss your bus. The snow had stopped while he was inside. Chicago had been transformed into the version of itself that only existed for an hour or two, after a heavy fall, quiet, clean, every surface padded into gentleness, the city's hard angles softened into something almost forgiving. The sidewalk outside Arden Global Tower was unplowed, but not deep. A maintenance crew was already working the building's entrance, and one of them, a man named Marcus, who worked days, raised a hand as Noah came out. Noah raised his in return. He walked to the bus stop at a pace he had calibrated exactly. Enough to warm his face. Not enough to arrive damp. The wind had dropped entirely. In its absence, the morning had a quality of held breath, the way cities sometimes do between the end of one thing and the beginning of the next. A bakery 2 blocks north had its lights on, the windows fogged with the warmth inside. A woman was walking a dog the color of caramel, both of them moving with the careful deliberation of people who have decided to enjoy the snow rather than negotiate around it. A boy of about 12 was shoveling a front walk with the focused energy of someone who believes he is doing a real job, which he was, and doing it well. The 7:10 northbound was on time, which in Noah's experience happened roughly 60% of the time and felt, on each occasion, like a small, specific grace. He found a window seat and watched the city pass. He was not thinking about the contract, or the check, or Elena Roth, or the complicated machinery of what would come next. He was thinking about Ethan. He thought about Ethan's cardiology appointments in the sequence he sometimes ran them, the way some people count other things, milestones. Not as a measure of distance traveled, but as a record of presence. The first one had been when Ethan was 2 weeks old, and Noah had sat in the waiting room while Caroline was inside with the baby, listening to a doctor explain what a bicuspid aortic valve was and what it might require over the years ahead. Noah had held Caroline's hand in the parking lot afterward, and they had said very little. The sky had been the particular gray of February, and a sparrow had sat on the curb near the car for a long time before flying away. He had always remembered the sparrow. He was not sure why. The appointments that followed had been, most of them, unremarkable in the way that manageable medical situations can be. Monitoring, confirmation of stability, the careful language of physicians who know that their patients' families are parsing every word for information about the future. Ethan had been good in doctors' offices from an early age, calm, cooperative, asking questions with the directness of a child who had learned that doctors were people with specific knowledge who would answer specific questions. His cardiologist, a woman named Dr. Okafor, had told Noah at the 6th appointment that Ethan was the most informed 8-year-old patient she had seen in 20 years of practice, which was either a compliment or an observation about the particular education that medical necessity provides. Probably both. He took out his phone and found the text from Brenda. The 2 bowls of cereal, the Lego accomplishment, the gravity with which these things had been reported. He read it twice. The bus stopped. He got off 2 blocks early to walk, as he sometimes did when the morning was bearable and he was not in a hurry. Which he was not. The cold had lost most of its edge. Somewhere on the block ahead of him, someone's window was open, and a radio was playing something orchestral strings, unhurried, the kind of music that occupied space without demanding attention. He walked home. He had started keeping a tally that day. A small notebook, initially Caroline's, she had used it for grocery lists, phone numbers, the small administrative debris of a shared life. After she died, he had found it in the kitchen drawer and turned to the first blank page. He made a mark for each appointment completed. Ethan seen, Ethan stable, Ethan accounted for. The mark he would make today would be number 18. He took out his phone to check the time and found a text from his mother-in-law, Brenda, who had stayed with Ethan overnight. He ate 2 bowls of cereal. He wants to show you something he built with the Legos. He is very serious about it. Noah read it twice and put the phone away. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of old wood and other people's cooking. He took the stairs. When he opened the door, Ethan was in the kitchen with Brenda, still in his pajamas, sitting on the counter with his feet dangling, eating a piece of toast with the careful attention that 8-year-olds bring to foods they genuinely enjoy. Ethan looked up. Dad, I built the Saturn V. The whole thing? 3rd stage took me until like 10:30. Grandma said I had to stop, but I was almost done. Brenda, a tall woman with patient eyes, who had raised Caroline with great care, and was now, without any ceremony or complaint, helping to raise Ethan, raised one eyebrow at Noah, in the particular way that communicated I tried. Let me see it, Noah said. The Saturn V rocket stood on Ethan's desk, beside the window. Correctly assembled, Noah could see at a glance that the stage separation was right, the command module properly positioned. It was approximately 17 inches tall. That's good work, Noah said. He meant it entirely. What did you do at work? Ethan asked. Noah sat on the edge of the bed. The uniform was still on him. He should shower, change, sleep for 2 hours before the appointment. He looked at his son, the dark eyes, the concentrated face, the toast crumbs on his collar. I had a meeting, he said. An important one. Did it go okay? It went well. I helped some people figure out a complicated problem. What kind of problem? Noah thought about how to say it. A translation problem, he said. Someone needed something, explained in a different language. And I was the only one there who could explain it. Ethan nodded, satisfied. He was not particularly interested in the details. He had the pragmatic worldview of children who have spent significant time in medical settings. The important information was whether it went okay, and it had. Come see the rocket, he said. The fins are really straight this time. I will, Noah said. Let me change my clothes. He went to the bathroom, ran the water cold, and stood with his hands on the edge of the sink. He was not certain, for a moment, what was happening in his chest. He had not cried since Caroline's funeral. He had made a decision, sometime in the months after, that grief without function was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with Ethan needing breakfast and appointments and someone to check his homework. But he stood in the bathroom in his gray uniform, with Ethan's voice drifting in from the other room explaining the structural merits of the Saturn V's 3rd stage, and the folded contract document in his jacket pocket, and a number in a bank account that would, for the first time in 8 years, allow him to stop calculating. He stood there for a while. Then he washed his face and changed his shirt. In the top drawer of his dresser, beneath a stack of folded receipts and Ethan's spare inhaler and a button that had come off a coat and never been reattached, was a small notebook, pale green cover, spiral bound, the pages soft with age. On the first page were grocery lists in Caroline's handwriting: milk, the good bread, lemons, yogurt for E, and a phone number for a plumber, and a note that said call Mom before Thursday. On the page after that, in Noah's handwriting, were small vertical marks arranged in groups of 5, 17 of them. He sat on the edge of the bed, opened the notebook, and added one more. 18. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he closed the notebook and put it back where it lived. 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning in January, Elena Roth arrived on the building's basement level at 6:15 in the morning. She was alone, no assistant, no prepared remarks, no note card with names. She wore her coat and her regular shoes, and she carried nothing. Martin had offered the note card. She had declined. The names were in her head, where they needed to be, because she had put them there intentionally the night before, at her desk, writing them by hand on a piece of paper, and reading them back several times, until they were no longer data but people, the way you have to learn people through repetition. Through the deliberate investment of attention, the overnight maintenance crew worked the building's lower floors between midnight and 6. There were 7 of them. Their names were Darnell, Yolanda, Marcus, Petra, Kevin, Singh, and Ruth. Elena had researched each of them in the way she researched anything she considered important, thoroughly, without intermediary. Darnell had worked nights for 6 years and was studying for an electrician's license on alternate weekends. Yolanda had a son in high school who played basketball. Petra, the oldest, had been with the building since it opened in 2009. Kevin was 24 and had been there 8 months. Singh had a degree in accounting from a university in Punjab that was not recognized by Illinois licensing boards. Ruth's daughter was finishing nursing school. She talked to each of them. She did not give a speech. She introduced herself, her name, what she did, which most of them already knew from her photograph in the lobby, and then she asked what each person's workload actually felt like in practice, what was broken that had never been fixed, what requests they had submitted that had never received a response. She listened without redirecting, without the performed patience of someone waiting for the person in front of them to finish so they can begin solving. Petra, who was 61 years old and had worked in the building since it opened, told her about the elevator bank on the 23rd floor that required specific handling to operate safely, and which had been reported 4 times in writing over 18 months without response. She described the handling procedure matter-of-factly. You had to hold the door sensor manually while pressing the floor button, or the car would stall between levels. Everyone who worked nights knew this. Nobody who worked days did. Elena wrote it down. Singh told her about the supply closet on the 41st floor that had been locked since November and whose key was with a facilities manager who had been on leave, which meant the overnight crew had been carrying supplies from the 36th floor every night for 6 weeks. He told her this without complaint, in the tone of someone reporting a fact. The absence of complaint was, Elena recognized, not the absence of something worth complaining about. It was the reasonable behavior of someone who has learned that complaints from certain quarters do not tend to produce results. She wrote that down too. She stayed for an hour and a half. When she left, she took the service elevator to the lobby. She had not taken the service elevator in 11 years of coming to this building, and walked out into the January cold and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, looking up at the building's face. The morning was clear. The sky, the pale blue of winter at 7 a.m. 52 floors. All those lit windows, all that commerce and ambition and carefully organized importance, and the whole structure held together by people whose names she had not learned in over a decade of walking past them. She had not made a policy of invisibility. She had simply not made a policy of the alternative. And in the absence of a deliberate choice, the default had taken over. Which was how most failures of that kind worked. They were not acts of malice. They were acts of omission so habitual they had stopped feeling like acts at all. She walked to her car and sat in it for a moment before starting the engine. Then she took out her phone and called the facilities manager about the elevator. Noah's first consulting engagement for Arden Global was a contract review for a potential partnership with a Swiss precision engineering firm. It was 11 pages, mostly German, with some technical specifications in French. He completed it in 4 hours on a Tuesday afternoon while Ethan was at school, sitting at the kitchen table with the good coffee he had started buying. He emailed his analysis to Cassidy, who had been made the liaison for his consulting arrangement. And then he closed his laptop and went to pick up Ethan from school. The walk home took 12 minutes. Ethan talked about a book he was reading, something about a boy who discovers a map in his grandfather's attic, and about the fact that his friend Marcus had gotten a dog, and about whether dogs could be allergic to other dogs, which he seemed to find both scientifically interesting and morally concerning. Noah listened to all of it. Outside the building, Ethan stopped and looked up at the sky. The light was the low gold of late January afternoon, and a pair of pigeons was navigating it with great effort against the wind. "Dad," he said, "do you like your job?" Noah considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I like some parts of it," he said. "The part where I can help you when you need me. That part I like more than anything." Ethan looked at him. "That's not really about the job." "No," Noah said. "I guess it isn't." Ethan appeared to accept this answer as reasonable and resumed walking. Noah followed. The audit was completed in March. The independent firm, a labor economics consultancy based in Minneapolis, found that Arden Global's facilities and support staff in Chicago were compensated at rates averaging 11% below market median, with the gap widest among overnight workers. Elena reviewed the report on a Thursday afternoon, signed the commitment form that same evening, and had Martin schedule the compensation revisions to take effect in April. She did not announce it in a press release. She sent a letter, handwritten, envelope, stamp, to each member of the overnight crew. Ruth, who had worked the third-floor bathrooms for 9 years and had a daughter finishing nursing school in Evanston, taped hers to her refrigerator. Noah received his at his apartment address. He read it standing at the kitchen counter while Ethan ate breakfast. It said what it said, a direct acknowledgement, no corporate language, nothing performative. He read it once, folded it, and set it on the counter. "What's that?" Ethan asked. "Letter from someone at work. A nice one or a bad one?" Noah looked at the folded paper. "A real one," he said. Ethan seemed to find this a satisfactory category. He finished his cereal and went to find his backpack, and Noah stood in the kitchen for a moment, in the particular quiet that comes in the space between one part of a life and whatever comes after it. Not happiness, exactly, not resolution. Something more durable than either of those, the feeling of a structure that had been built with care and was holding the weight it was designed to hold. He made Ethan's lunch, packed his bag, and walked him down to the school bus. The February air was cold but cleaner than January. With the particular brightness that comes when winter begins, almost imperceptibly, to release its grip, the bus came. Ethan climbed on. He waved from the window with the unselfconscious ease of a child who has never had reason to doubt that his father will be watching. Noah watched until the bus turned the corner. Then he walked back inside, poured a second cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table to begin his day.